Today we have Melissa Doer, and she is from Mengel, Metzger and Barr. She is going to present our single audit report and our extra classroom activity report. And then following that, we have Keely Hines with Bonadio, who's going to go through our risk assessment. So Melissa, it's all yours.
Okay, so as Nancy said, I have two reports that I'm going to be going through. I'll start with the single audit report. So this is the audit that we do of the federal dollars that you receive. And on page, on page 4 of that single audit report, this summarizes all of the programs that you receive federal money for. So any municipality getting over $750,000 is required to have a single audit, and this is the single audit report that I'm referencing. So if you look on page 4, there are asterisks next to the special education cluster. That's the program that we tested this year. That's considered a major program. And then if you go through page 5, there's just some footnotes about the presentation and some other just general footnotes. But on page 6 is the schedule of the findings and question costs. And as you can see, that the report was an unmodified report, which is very positive. That's what you want. There were no findings, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, which is very positive. And then it goes in to just show that, again, that federal program that we audited was the special education cluster, and that you qualify as a low-risk auditee. Is there any questions on the single audit report? Okay. Pretty straightforward. There's these two reports are fairly small, so they're easy to get through. The second report that I was going to go through is the extra classroom activity funds. So this is your student activities, your extracurricular clubs that are typically ran by your students and a faculty advisor that's appointed by the board. So on the first 2 pages is the opinion for the extra class report. It is a qualified opinion, just because of the fact that it's a cash basis and there's cash collection at various points throughout the district. We can only really test what was submitted to the central treasurer for deposit. So that's what our opinion is based on. On page 3 and 4, this is a summary of all the different clubs and the activities that they had during the year as far as total receipts and total disbursements in those clubs. So overall, there was about $135,000 cash balance at year end in total for the high school and the middle school. And then there is some footnotes on page 5. We did put a note in this year about COVID-19, and that was a general footnote that went into all of the districts that we audit, basically saying that due to the pandemic, there were certain, because the districts were being shut down, the participation of students getting sign-offs and all of that towards the end of the year was affected because of that. And then on page 6 is the current year recommendation that we had regarding profit and loss statements. Just there was a couple fundraising events that the profit and loss statement wasn't signed by the club treasurer, and then there was just some recommendations to provide a little bit more detail as far as the quantity of items sold and what was sold, so we could reconcile that to the deposits. And then on page 7, we list any inactive clubs that didn't have any activity. We just recommend that those be reviewed. If activity isn't anticipated in the future, we just recommend that they be closed according to board policy. And then there were prior year recommendations that were corrected and implemented during the year, which was very positive. As you can see, were 5 of them. So that was very positive. Any questions on that report or any of the recommendations or anything?
Tom, you're on mute.
Still on mute there, Tom.
I was unmuting at the wrong place. Pardon me. I was unmuting on my little icon. Sorry. No, is there any way, because this recurs a number of times, we've seen this in this particular area, extracurricular activities. Is there any form that we deal with to give to them, or is there any recommendation you can make in terms of form that when we establish a cupboard, there's policy that they get it from the top down, just to formalize this in any way, shape, or form?
So you're asking like for a template, Tom?
Yeah, just basically a template that they would utilize, that we wouldn't run into this, because it's a recurring theme, I think, that we run into. Just what the requirements are, what the expectations are, how they go through the steps every year, because it's always turning over in terms of the new advisors.
Well, Tom, I think you and I are on the same mind wave here, Elaine. So earlier today, I spoke with Nancy about this, and I think as a corrective action, what we'd like to do is make sure that there's a template form that people are using. We're going to go back and retrain, provide professional development for all the staff. While it's not everybody doing it, a couple people who made this error, we want to make sure that everybody has the consistency, continuity. So we're going to go retrain. We want to make sure we provide a template and people are trained on that template. And then we want to have some spot checks from those who are running. There's a couple people who have oversight at the middle school and the high school. We want them to provide oversight and do spot checks to make sure that this is occurring correctly throughout the year. So that would be the corrective action plan that we'd be looking at to help resolve this matter, basically. I think what happens is you're correct. And actually, it's not just a Oswego issue. Every now and then you get one or two who they don't have the treasurer sign or the president sign the minutes, or they do something a little different, like handwrite them rather than type it up. So I think a standard template and everybody getting trained on that, and then spot check where they say what gets monitored gets done, that should resolve the matter, I believe. So yeah, that's our proposal. Does that help?
Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, thank you for stating that, but that's exactly what I was looking for. Because, and even when we did our training, they pointed out this area that is constantly having problems, and if we can address that with a template and just regiment it, that would be great.
Yeah,
Thank
and Tom, I'm sorry, Tom. There are always findings in the extracurricular account because it is a cash basis, and we do have a turnover of staff. So you're always going to see something in the report. You're never going to see a clean report in any school district in the state. So just wanted you to be aware of that. And then there is also guidance from New York State on the extra classroom activity funds. And we give that out to the auditors and to the treasurers to share. But what we haven't done in probably 2 years is a training. So we're going to bring in probably one of the firms to come in to do a training for our clubs. But we have corrected a lot of the findings on there, and we are communicating the findings in these reports back to the clubs so that they understand, where they might have erred on one of their forms.
Right. No, I understand that, Nancy. I was just saying, I know it recurs, and I don't think we've standardized yet, but by doing a training and a template, we can eliminate some of this. And my other question was, who then will speak to the clubs about the inactive clubs from here?
So what we would do is, between Nancy and I, we will speak with all the principals to see which ones aren't aren't active. Now this year we have a couple more because of the COVID-19. Some of them you couldn't do in person, but we have, like, I think it was 2 from the audit that I read here that have not been active for a while. So we'll speak to the principals, and if they're not active, then we will go through the process of discontinuing them, period, basically. Okay.
Yep. Thank you very much, guys.
Absolutely. We'll put that formal plan together and we'll work from there. Does that help? Okay.
So now, as a follow-up to that, does a lack of spending money equate to inactivity? So I guess what I'm wondering is, are we talking about a club not being a club, or a club not being able to spend out of an account?
Right.
Or, did they have a year where they couldn't or didn't want to, but may in the future?
My response would be it's a club that people are that truly has not been active. Nobody's doing it. They don't have any kids that want to do it. And it's just been kind of just sitting there waiting for a group to pull it together. And so there's been no activity at all. Like, it's not like this year where we couldn't do it because of COVID. It's truly a club that's really dispersed and nobody's interested in doing it again. Right?
Yeah, no, I get that, because I've actually been a mentor to a student club that did nothing, and it was like, why are you existing? So, but I just wanted to clarify, because the difference between being active and then having to actively spend money could be 2 different things.
Yeah.
So can I just bring in this? I think the report's great. I think I'm glad we're doing what we're doing, but just as a general knowledge type thing. Does our senior class typically raise $85,000 in a year, like last year's class did? Is that something that really happens?
We'd have to go back and check and see.
Okay. I'm actually not looking for the answer necessarily. I thought you might know, but that number stood out at me. And,
Jim?
Yeah.
Any senior class, if they don't spend all the money that they've fundraised in their 4 years of fundraising, they turn it to the junior class. So the excess rolls to the next incoming class. And I also know that there's a huge amount, Nancy probably knows the number, from a few years back with flights, airline tickets. JetBlue gave money back to a class who had to cancel a trip, and so that is also continues to go from class to class. So that might be some of that large amount.
That's a great point, Pam. Thank you for bringing that up, because the class before that, the 2019 class, is zeroed out at the end of the year. Were they zeroed out because they transferred money to the next class?
We'd have to go back and check to see.
Yeah, I don't have that data here. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Melissa, but
I don't off the top of my head, but most likely that's the case.
yeah.
Okay, because when I look at that, I look at the class of 2019, they started with 13.3 almost. They dispersed almost 14 and ended up with nothing. And even if that, their whole disbursement for the whole year was about 14K. But the next class received 85K. And again, I'm not disputing these. It's just when these size of numbers are in these kinds of reports, they stand out to me. And actually, Pam brought up what was going to be my second question is, that the class of 2020 ended with 30 or 73.45, where does that money go? Because it seems, at least as it's written in the report, the class of 2019 cash balance was 0. But the class of 2020 cash balance actually is $7,345.
Mhm.
All right. So if that 2020 money, the 73.45 was rolled into 21, I would think that may appear there by now, because the 2019 zeroed out to roll in, if Pam's got that.
It may not have happened yet, Jim, because of COVID, because the students are not able to go and vote on closing out the account and moving that money.
So we would still call back the officers of the class of 2020 to do this?
Good question. Good question. I'll find out how that works. I'll talk to Lisa Schultzke and ask her how that works.
Okay, thanks. It's just, this just the 85K stood out. So I'm trying to a little bit understand how these numbers flesh out.
And then what I'll do too is when I'll put that in transmittal, Jim, and then what I will also do is find out how much of the JetBlue money moves from class to class. Some classes use a little of it if they're running low on fundraising. Some classes don't use it at all and pass it on to the next class. But I'll get you a balance on that as well.
Okay. So I heard two questions. One is about the 85K, and then the second is what happens when the class ends the year with their funds? Where does it go? Okay, Nancy says she'll put it in transmittal.
Thanks, Mathis. Thanks, Nancy.
No problem. No issue. No problem. Any other questions?
All right, thanks, Melissa.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay.
Okay, Keely, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all virtually. So I am going to go through the independent internal audit report. You'll see the Bonadio logo on the bottom. Just to make sure that everybody understands the difference between what Melissa does for the district and what I do. So Bonadio serves as the internal auditors. So our role is to perform an annual update to the risk assessment, which is what we'll talk about today, and then do almost like a phase B, where we would do some focused testing, further investigating, based upon an area or areas that we recommend to focus on, and or you folks want to focus on. So anything that we put in this report doesn't necessarily mean that's the direction you have to go in. That's entirely up to you. And then versus Melissa serving as your independent external auditor, of which she likely reviewed the financial statements with you folks in the fall, and then was going through the ECA and single audit with you this evening. So just to make sure, again, that everybody understands what everyone's role is and what you're receiving. The first page is just a quick report, again, explaining what this service line is, and just reiterating that this isn't, although we call it risk assessment and internal audit work, it is not a independent financial statement audit in which we give an opinion. So had we done further testing and analyzing, we may identify things that wouldn't necessarily come up in the scope of this work. The second page is the table of contents. This year, you'll see some changes from our risk assessment reports in the previous year. I'm kind of excited about it. I'll be able to show you some supplemental information that we've now incorporated into our update to our risk assessment process. So we'll touch on that section as we make our way through the report. Page 1, 2, and 3 is just general information. Again, explaining the background behind doing this risk assessment and internal audit. You actually perform this because you are required to. The New York State passed legislation back in 2005 that required you to appoint an internal audit, and this is part of complying with those regulations. And then moving forward to page 2, explains our risk assessment and our internal audit strategy. And then page 3, I like to touch on because there's a couple specific terms that I just want to touch on to make sure that everybody understands. Inherent risk is the risk that there is misstatement to the financial statement, absence of your control environment. So the go-to example is often extra classroom activities is inherently more risky, regardless of the internal controls that the district has put in place, just because of the factors surrounding that particular transaction class. You talked about already the turnover of the students, the turnover of the staff, just the volume of transactions that are happening spread out across the district involving a lot of hands. With that certainly comes risk. So it's those concerns or issues that exist without consideration for the specific controls in place that the district has. Control risk is really when you talk about the risk of material misstatement, whether it be that maybe the design of the internal controls is not adequate, so meaning perhaps the district hasn't even really put appropriate controls in place, versus maybe they've designed and developed these internal controls, but for whatever reason there's a breakdown and they're not happening effectively. So those two types of scenarios are what's going to drive that control risk. And then materiality is how it sounds in terms of expressing the significance of that transaction, the high dollar amounts, the voluminous number of transactions that are happening within a particular transaction. And then those three components are what we use to calculate an overall risk for material misstatement. So if you flip over to page 4 and 5, we outline each of the audit areas and assigned an inherent control risk, a materiality, and then developed an overall risk for material misstatement. So we highlight a few items of significance to provide you a summary by audit area, but really a lot more kind of goes into this consideration as part of this process and part of this engagement. We interview a number of key personnel that work directly with Nancy. We often select a couple of folks that maybe are indirectly related to the financial reporting, just to get a new perspective, just to kind of test the temperature of the water. The idea is to figure out where changes are happening, where there may be risk based upon feedback that we're receiving. And then with regards to control, really what we do is take a look at the design in terms of what has changed through observation and inquiry, and then we perform some walkthroughs. So we have not done at great length controls testing. That would be something that if you wanted that would come in that phase B that I spoke about earlier. But we perform a walkthrough just to get a general gist of ensuring that we have an appropriate understanding of how things are done. Then, if you flip over to page 6, I'd like to highlight a couple of items that we list out as identified risks. So these are items that have popped up. Sometimes they are, in fact, reoccurring, and then we provide management an opportunity to respond. Sometimes the response may be appropriate that the district is making a decision to tolerate that risk. A good example would be when we talk about identified risk number 2. Nancy has acknowledged, yep, I agree, we are using this kind of archaic approach to tracking inventory, but here are the reasons that we're willing to accept that risk at this time. And then sometimes the response is, in fact, hey, you're right, we agree, and here's some corrective action that we're going to put into place. So specifically on identified risk number 1, we pointed out that the district treasurer has retired. Currently, that individual is helping out the district on a temporary basis. Unfortunately, Nancy and I have talked about this. I told her to keep my ear open if I hear of anybody looking. These are difficult positions to fill. This is not unusual or uncommon, but is, the fact of the matter that when somebody of that type of position is leaving and you don't necessarily have a replacement queued up and ready, there is risk involved in that. We already touched on identified risk number 2 with regards to tracking inventory for food service. So management has made an attempt to look into some different softwares and mechanisms for tracking that inventory, but at this time, cost benefit has really proven to be the underlying factor for not making any changes at this point. And honestly, that's a typical response for that particular risk on a number of our school districts that we do this work for. Number 3 relates to the district not currently having a written disaster recovery plan. The district has engaged Fox Point Solutions, which is a subsidiary of the Bonadeo Group that specializes in information technology. So they're actually not accountants, they're just folks that consult in the IT arena. So that can be essentially part of that corrective action, they can assist with that type of thing and make recommendations and really highlight where the district may be most susceptible to this, whether it be penetration through your firewall or loss of records, things like that. They run the gamut on that, and like I said, they specialize in that, and they aren't accountants that dabble in IT. That's really all that they do. We outlined a risk about a district-wide outage, and the district has already taken on a capital project to ensure that something of that fashion would not happen again. And again, that would be something that Foxpoint would consider as part of their evaluation as well. Number 5, we talked about the lack of written procedures for the key positions, including payroll, cash disbursements, and cash receipts. Again, this is not uncommon, and it is difficult to find that bench strength to sit down and actually try to go through this process. But as you'll see in the response, Nancy mentioned that there's been a hope to reposition a typist role in the department, and perhaps that those types of things can start to be documented. And the whole idea, again, is to protect the district from somebody, God forbid, having to go on an unexpected leave, or really just choosing to go elsewhere in the district. The idea is that you want to try to make that as smooth of a transition as possible, and this would consequently also provide you with an opportunity to cross-train if necessary. So again, even if a leave is temporary, that you've identified what needs to be done, what was this person doing that would be considered key in their responsibilities to ensure no hiccups happening at the district. Identified risk number 6 relates to capital project reporting and closing out. So we just suggested that ensuring that those projects close out, any sort of remaining funds associated with that project need to be accounted for and reconciled, because a capital project can be funded by funds from the general fund, could be debt. So depending upon that initial source of those funds will dictate what the district needs to do at the point that those projects are closed out. Number 7, we had made a recommendation that the vendor listing be reviewed on a regular basis. The district is going to begin reviewing that on a quarterly basis. The idea behind that is really just ensuring that there's a fresh set of eyes on those new vendors that are being established, with the idea of mitigating risk for fictitious vendors, and even maybe just a vendor that isn't appropriate. And at times, this gives the district an opportunity to say, hey, this new vendor popped up. What is this? Should we have really, gone out to bid for this? What, is this appropriate that this popped up and we didn't know about it? There were, in number 8, some reporting deadlines that were missed within the child nutrition program. Much of that was the result of some turnover in the department, and it seems that that's been resolved, and really the new director resolved that directly with the Fed and state to ensure that that delayed reporting was explained and resolved, and in the end, really no harm, no foul. It was the result of, again, that turnover and the learning curve that came with that. Identified risk number 1. This has to do with the pandemic operations plan. So effective April 1st this year, all public employers, which includes everything from counties, cities, towns, villages, school districts, have to develop a comprehensive plan for how you will respond to ensure the continued operations of the district amidst a health crisis of sorts. So it could be COVID-19, or it could be, God only knows what could come up in the future. We wanted to point that out to you folks so that you're aware. Different stipulations are involved in that. I think we've shared a one-page summary with Nancy a handful of months back, or a couple of months back, but it's just to kind of remind you that that's out there at this time. New York State has not mandated that policy or plan be turned in. However, we have been talking to our districts about this and just saying, be aware that this would be a place where perhaps the comptroller will start asking for those. So certainly we don't want to be caught not ready for that. And in the end, really, I think the district will benefit. The idea is that you folks do want to continue to be able to educate and provide the services that you need to meet the needs and objectives that your students require. So hopefully this plan will help respond to that. And then identified risk number 10, which I apologize, that's a little snafu in our formatting. We mentioned that work with Fox Point was not completed. Essentially, that was the result of the pandemic. That was about to kick off right before we went through New York pause. So we have connected IT again with our folks at Fox Point, and that's underway. But we just wanted you folks to be aware that that's why it may have seemed like there was a gap. You did not receive a report from that work yet because that was delayed as a result of the pandemic. So moving forward, we provided on page 9 and 10 a couple of recommendations for areas that we could explore as part of this phase 2 that I spoke about. I laid out recommendations for assisting in doing a walk back and reconciliation of capital projects and the movement of those projects to capital assets and the related internal controls over those transactions for the last 5 years. We also had suggested that we could do observation, inquiry, and review of key personnel job responsibilities within the payroll function, and then we can do some specifically tailored testing. One of the nice benefits to this type of audit versus your external audit that Melissa does is much of what she has to focus on is truly dictated by audit standards, dictated by materiality levels. And so this is really an opportunity to hopefully not say, oh gosh, more auditors again, but leverage that opportunity to maybe look at something that would not be within the scope of what Melissa would do. So, you know, perhaps some of our districts go through a retro payroll run if a bargaining unit, the negotiations were delayed and a special payroll run was needed to be done. Maybe they want to just kind of have somebody walk back through that calculation, make sure that those retro pay amounts were appropriate and properly calculated. Maybe overtime with your facilities and maintenance folks with a concern. We've had a district express concerns specifically with substitutes and how substitute teachers come on, they get paid at a rate. When they hit X day, they become a long-term or a regular substitute, and that rate changes. Is that happening appropriately, accurately, and are they being bumped back down to a true sub rate when they take on a new assignment and that long-term position is over? We can look at terminated employees, ensuring that they're cut off at the end. We can look at new hires or a mix of all of that. What I do like to do though is perform some sort of analysis on, hey, I'll test 60 individuals for payroll because I just don't think that there's a lot of benefit to that. I like to try to focus on specific populations, specific transactions that in our data mining may appear to be anomalies or outliers, or again, specific to a particular transaction, a pay date, things like that. I'll kind of pause on that for a moment. I just want to share a couple items that we performed that were additional analyses that you will not see in our previous reports on page 11, 12, and 13. Page 11, we performed a Benford's Law analysis. So what that means is Benford's Law says when you have a pool of disbursement, so this does not include payroll, this is just basic disbursement transactions, there is a statistical likelihood of the first digit of each dollar amount. Starting with ones will be the highest sequential number that you will see, and it works its way down. So this chart shows you what Benford's analysis would expect, and then shows you how Oswego's transactions lined up to that curve. And it's pretty close. There's certainly reasons why that could vary. The first time that we actually ran it, we did see some anomalies in that, and when we further investigated, a lot of it had to do with reoccurring payment amounts for Medicare. So when we extracted those out and pulled those dollar amounts out, we could even more so see that curve. So the idea behind this is really informational purposes. We're going to start building this on a historical basis so that you can go back and look at that data to see if there are changes taking place. You know, a district may say, we want you to further investigate when they see an anomaly that maybe we couldn't quickly explain. But you're pretty close and on target, and we'll keep building that information and sharing that with you going forward. On page 12, this is 2 analytics specific to your transportation department. If you take a look at that first analytic, industry norms dictate that typically the districts experience 10 to 15 cents per of repairs and maintenance per mile of a school bus travel. Obviously, that is subject to change, dependent upon, you know, certainly in New York, we get hit with salty weather, which has been a wear and tear on a school district, or on a school bus, excuse me, more than a bus down south. And then certainly rural versus suburban, that's going to, or rural versus urban is going to have a different impact on how those buses are handled and driven on a daily basis. So it's an industry norm, it is an average, but again, we can build that historical data to see where that movement is taking place. Your fiscal year 2019 was right on target, and your fiscal year 2020 went up quite a bit. So if you take a look at those repairs and that mileage, your repairs almost doubled where your mileage dropped. That's the direct result of COVID, right? Your buses were not running from March, 17th or 18th or whatnot through the rest of the year, the way that they normally would if school had been in session. So that's the cause of that mileage drop. And then a lot of districts actually took advantage of that window to perform some significant repairs while the buses were off the road. And then certainly this number can vary too, depending upon your fleet age and where new buses are coming on and old buses are being disposed of. So again, nothing that's necessarily troubling me, but we look forward to trying to build up that historical data for you folks, because it's just a nice way to kind of benchmark how things are going year to year and backed up against the industry norms. And then you're right on target for your full-time equivalent for mechanics in relation to your fleet size. So again, right there on target, and we'll continue to take a look at that as part of our risk assessment. And then moving to page 13, every year the district is measured for fiscal stress score by the state. And this is actually a tool that we use to project what we anticipate the fiscal stress score will be based upon your ST3. And basically, the walk away from this is that nothing alarming or significant popped up in us doing that roll forward analysis using your ST3. So I would not expect any sort of alarming or incredibly troubling results when you do receive that fiscal score. So this is kind of a sneak peek at what you can expect when that information does become available. With that being said, that makes my way through the entire report. And then certainly at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions and then open up for dialogue in terms of maybe perhaps where you folks would like to have us conduct some focused testing for this year.
Any
Don't
questions?
everybody jump at once.
Go for it.
No, I was just looking at the recommendations. What do we think about an area to examine more closely of the ones that were put down, of the areas? Capital, in terms of examining that more closely?
Are you asking
I don't think that hurts at all.
What's that? Yeah, I mean, just around the board, around my tic-tac-toe board. What areas do we think that we might want to look at in terms of the recommendations that were put forward?
So I think all of them are important.
Mhm.
One of the areas that are important. It's hard to prioritize which one is most important. I would say though, certainly one that is of importance to me is looking also at the payroll piece as well, because we have, we have hundreds and hundreds of employees, and unfortunately we have a very limited number of staff with that. And I think it would be really important to look into the payroll process to see how we're doing with that, because we just want to keep our eye on it. So that would be my thought. We can always come back another year and look at each of these things, but for me, in my mind, payroll is very much so a concern. I don't know, not that we're doing anything wrong, but we have so many employees and we have a very limited number of people who work on the payroll. I think it's always a good thing to keep looking at it. This is my thought. I don't know how Nancy feels or the rest of you feel, but that's just my thought.
No, I agree with you, Mathis. That is an area that hasn't been looked at in a couple years. So I think that it's prudent to look at that again if that's what the audit committee wants to do. My question to Keely is, with the capital assets and the payroll, how many hours would be budgeted for each of those?
Yep, so, that's always like the next question, but some of it really depends on exactly what it is that you would be looking for us to do. So for you folks, we do a combined not to exceed fee for the risk assessment as well as the internal audit. So sometimes what we do is set a separate hourly rate that we then kind of back our way into where somebody wants to be comfortable in terms of what the level of work they're looking for. So, my thought is that we could do something with capital projects and capital assets and payroll, but it would be a lesser scope of both. I would likely probably bring that 5 years down. Maybe we would do like a 3-year look back, and then perhaps forego maybe a deep dive into the internal controls, but focus on just some recalculating of some very specific anomalies or a particular payroll run or retro runs or overtime or something like that, and just do some very specific testing in that particular area, and then that way we can cover both.
I mean, how's that sound, Tom? It gives you both things there?
Yeah, I like that. I agree with you relative to payroll. I think that the more information, the more data we get there, the better decisions we can make. And also because we're right in the middle of the capital project and looking back a couple years to make sure I think, again, focus us in on making smart decisions. So I like both of those myself.
I like it.
Do you have a particular population that you would want us to zero in? I mean, we can certainly select a couple of areas, new employees or hourly employees, but I don't know if there's something specific that you would want us to zero in on.
Well, if I can click in real quick, it did seem as though you specifically pointed out something about retirement, if I remember my notes correctly, when you spoke about payroll up above in the chart. It specifically mentioned something about retirees. Not that that has to be it, but it stood out in my mind that you pointed it out, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay. That's specifically like on the retirement reporting that is submitted to New York State. So that wouldn't necessarily be tied into doing recalculation of salaries. That was really just a lack of like cross-training. Again, that knowledge is sitting with so few people that there's one individual that's specifically responsible for that.
Okay.
Is there a way, so you have like 5 different things here. Can we pick like 2 of them as opposed to just one?
Sure, and then certainly, we can kind of table it in with the idea of maybe mucking up a couple of the others next year in conjunction with something else.
Yeah, like the I'm thinking like maybe the terminated employees and the hourly employees to see kind of how that's working. Like when people leave, sometimes they leave with certain benefits. Be good to see how we're doing with that. And then hour to hour, how are we tracking the hours? And are we paying people what they're supposed to get versus overage or under? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yep, so what we can do is take a look at, we can data mine and take a look at all of your hourly employees, and we can focus in on where we see some significant uptick in overtime, tie out their regular pay, tie out their overtime, ensure that that was approved, that sort of thing. And then for your terminated employees, we can calculate a final pay that we put up. You know, I stopped working on X date, so that we can recalculate that last pay. We can then take a look at what happens with regards to, like you said, a terminated employee that's, yes, terminated because they no longer are employed, but they could be just a retiree in which they continue to receive post-employment benefits like health insurance, and we can take a look at how that is handled.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work?
For me, board, how do you all feel? Does those two sound okay with you? Are you okay with that?
That works for me.
Do you want to think?
Yeah, it does for me because, yeah, I agree with Mathis because as I think about it, it seems like those are probably the most fluid types of money as opposed to regular salary people. So yeah, I agree with that. And if I've got the mic, I just thought it could add, seems to me as like we have 10 categories here.
There's more, believe it or not.
Okay, so, you know, as I think about things, I do a lot of assessment, and we try to assess everything within a certain period of time. Is there some kind of schedule set up so that over a certain period of time, we do assess at least everything once in that period of time? We can vary, like I agree with Tom. Capital and HR payroll, #1 right now. But I don't think if we are never, let's say in a 10-year period, if we're never looking at something,
Yeah,
that doesn't seem a good model for me.
right. There is a full listing of all the areas that we can put together for the board and share with you, and then we can kind of use that to guide, like, you know, and generally what happens is boards will say, okay, we did this and this the last 2 years, now let's focus on something different. Like some boards would look at special ed and that whole process of reimbursement. Another would look at transportation. A third would look at IT or security, right? So there's all these different areas, and I think we got these three because these are three that we haven't done recently, basically. So we can get a list together so that way you can see the whole list, and then as we move forward, we can kind of go from that list to pick for the future. So that way, you're right, Jim, we are that's reciprocal. Is it reciprocal? Is that the word?
Cyclical.
Thank you. Where we are looking at areas on a consistent basis, not the same area all the time. We're not missing anything. Right? Does that help? Yeah. Okay. So
So what we do from here is kind of strategize, pull together what it is that we need from you folks to get things set up. And then typically it's almost usually a 2-phase approach in terms of what we need. We usually need some information initially to get started, figure out what it is that we're actually then going to test, and then we'll bounce back additional requests that way. And we'll just coordinate directly with Nancy and/or who she designates as a point person, and we'll plan to meet back up with you folks later on in the spring.
that's great.
All right, Keely, I just want to make sure on the capital project, it's going to be a 3 instead of a 5-year look back, correct?
Yeah.
I just had a question relative to the COVID plan, the response plan.
Mhm.
Isn't that what we currently are continually evolving through, or is this a separate plan, dedicated plan?
Totally separate, dedicated plan. So it came out like last year, the governor said, we want plans for every municipality, every school district. so you can deal with a pandemic, so we never go through trying to create these plans, you know, in the future. But you're looking at all of those areas that of concern. So we just got some PD on it probably about a month ago as superintendents, and the cabinet has looked at the plan, what the components are. So we're already in the process of putting one together, but it just kind of started towards the end of last year. I think end of last year, once this thing was going on here with the pandemic. So totally separate plan.
So since Tom brought it up, I would just say that one of the things that concerns me, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is everybody else?
I think everybody else has to mute when.
Sorry. One of the, Mathis, I read the PD from the governor back in early December, and one of the things that concerns me a bit is the fact that school building employees are not considered essential. So that's not that I want to dive into the weeds of that, but Tom brought it up, and it's something that I think.
Yeah, they changed that. Like, out the blue, you know, governor gets up to the microphone and he just says, changing a couple things, and then next thing we know, school employees are not considered essential. Well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like, how are we going to keep the schools open? But we're not. Yeah, they changed it. All school employees are no longer essential, which that was like maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, maybe. I think we heard about that. And it was just out the blue. Every week he gets up and says something, and nobody's prepared. Nobody knows what that means. Well, now it's really critical because we're in the time of vaccines. We're in the time of, you know, trying to get people back to work. And so now these employees, our employees are no longer considered to be essential. Yeah. Yeah. It came up. It's out there.
Yeah. So yeah.
Part of this plan is to force all of the public employers to then define it themselves. So like the counties, the cities, the towns, they're having to go through this too, because technically I was actually an essential employee through the pandemic in New York State, in a public accounting firm, met the definition of essential. And we kind of, you know, giggled to ourselves thinking, you know, nobody really cares what we do ever. How could you possibly define this as essential? But we really did fall within that realm.
We care. We do care.
Yeah, same terminology, but now asking you folks to define it, come up with a rationale, and then the idea is it's who you define as essential. You then have to have a mechanism for being able to contact trace, to track their whereabouts, to have proper PPE for them if those are going to be the folks that are coming on site. So certainly the idea would be to your benefit to try to reduce that as much as possible in terms of defining who is essential. But in a school district, that's even more difficult because you can't send a bunch of kids to school without teachers, right? So that's a job that can't be done, although yes, we're experiencing this whole hybrid and remote environment, but really for a school to be truly successful, you want your teachers there, but then part of that means, okay, you're saying that they're essential, here are all of these things that you're going to have to put in place because you've said that they are essential.
Right. If I remember the PD correctly from the governor, it actually said that essential was based on meeting necessary services like school lunch. It actually talked about that rather than, so again, I trust Mathis. I know he's going to give us a great plan. It's just since Tom brought it up that for 4 or 5 weeks right now, that really hit it home to me. Because when I first read that from the governor, it was like, school teachers are not essential the way I read it.
You are correct, Jim. You read it right. So yeah, we've gotten some training on it. There's some more training we still need to get on it. And we have the actual template of what needs to go in the plan. And so now we're going to have to just kind of wade our way through it and try to figure it out and get it together because it's due by April, middle of April, as you said earlier, April 1st, excuse me. So we're working on it, but yes, we have it. Ooh. I'm good. Would there be anything else from everybody else? Everybody good?
Nancy, do you need the recommendation for the documents to be brought forward to the board at the next board meeting from the committee? Would the committee recommend the documents to go to the next board meeting for vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we will attach to that the corrective action plan as well for items that were there, okay? All right. Okay.
Thanks, Keely.
Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy. See you in the spring.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we'll see everybody in a couple minutes.
Yep, and the other one.
Okay.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.